Thank you so much for that introduction, Dan. God, Diana's CV, she's not even 30 yet. If she wasn't so nice, I might hate her a little bit. I'd also like to acknowledge the Wangal people of the Eora Nation. Sovereignty was never ceded. Now, we're here to talk about Diana's third novel, Signs of Damage. It's actually a book that's really difficult to talk about without the dreaded word spoilers. But I am going to try and dance around that while conveying to you what a thrilling read it is. And on that note, I did just want to ask you, Diana, what genre do you put this book in?
So I found out what the genre was called when I was like halfway through writing the book. And the word for it is summer noir, so that's just like bad things happening in nice places. So it's like White Lotus is like the obvious, most popular example, or other things I was looking at the time was there's a book by Deborah Levy called Swimming Home, which is about a sort of dysfunctional wealthy family staying at a French villa. And then an outsider comes in and inserts some tension, and then it all erupts in violence, which is also probably a fair summary of my novel. So you could read Swimming Home instead. So in summer noir.
Oh, I love that. I love that it's got a specific word, because I was finding it so hard to place it. It is literary fiction, but also the thriller aspect of it. Like, I was very surprised by how gripped I was by this book. It really is one of those where you end each chapter and you look at your clock in bed and you think, oh, just one more. Very tired the next day. It's through this book also, trauma is the beating heart of this book, but not in a way that I have ever read in a novel before. Maybe not even ever in a way that I've seen on screen, actually. It's not typical, like we've seen in the past few years, where, trauma is the key that unlocks everything. At times I thought, it's almost, or when I finished the book, I thought, it's almost a little bit like the anti A Little Life.
Yeah.
And I was curious, I want to hear about how you became interested in exploring trauma in this book, because I assume that it was front of mind when you started writing the first few pages.
It was. I think what I was interested in is it's like become sort of the question that's on the back of the book, which is like, what's the difference between understanding another person and trying to explain them? And so I think I was interested, like, very broadly in that, like, human impulse to tell stories about our own lives, and then also to tell stories about other people's lives in a way that is consistent with our own story, and to reach for the easiest explanation. And at the same time, as I was like thinking about that I guess that's like such an abstract question, which is essentially about like the role of narrative in our own lives. So, almost any book could explore that, but I think I was specifically interested in the particular like cultural scripts that become the easy narratives to reach for. And it felt like in our cultural moment, a narrative that we were being told over and over again in TV and in literature was that if someone's behaving in a way that you don't understand, there's probably a traumatic backstory that could account for all of their behaviour. And so if you can just unlock that backstory, then you have the key to understanding them. I was interested in, I guess, subverting that, and not like, I didn't want to contradict it or like delegitimize it, because obviously those like the things that people suffer do really influence them, and there's a reason that story has so much cultural purchase in books like A Little Life. I just wanted to look at whether there were other ways to understand people, and look at, create a book that like complicated that narrative.
Did you have any hesitancy about going down that path? Were there any concerns about misinterpretation, or did you feel very confident in what you were doing from the beginning?
No, I wasn't confident at all. I think, in a way that's a good thing. Like, I think I always, I do sort of have a suspicion of confidence when you're drafting. Like, I think the day that you're like, God, that's amazing, is probably the day that you've written just absolute crap. I think the stuff that you're a bit more like embarrassed about or unsure if anyone else thinks this way is usually the stuff that ends up resonating with people. So yeah, I wasn't confident at all, and I think, because I think one of the things that I wanted to, I suppose one of the things I wanted to do with this book was challenge that idea that everybody has, that everybody's behaviour can be explained. And obviously one of the reasons that trauma plots are so popular is because they take a character and that character is like exhibiting unusual traits or like self-destructive habits, and then in a series of flashbacks we slowly reveal the terrible thing that happened in their past that made them this way. And then when you get to the final flashback, you get this like catharsis of like, finally you understand what's happened to them. And so if you write a book that challenges that, then you don't leave the reader with that sense of resolution. You leave them still being frustrated and not understanding why people are like that. So I think that was the thing that I was most nervous about. I was like, how do I create a book that explores that idea but also is formally satisfying, so people don't finish the book and think that there was like no insights, or that they're just frustrated and confused, as opposed to confused and energized.
Have you had any sense that you've left people frustrated?
Yeah, some people. I mean, yeah, I guess it depends on what you're reading for. Like, so, I mean, I think, like, I always like books that make the things seem more complicated than they did at the start. But I think that's such a fine line, because there's a difference between, like, actually someone said this to me once, they were like, there's a difference between ambiguity and opacity. So ambiguity is like, I think ambiguity can be clarifying, like it's identifying nuances and understanding that there are like subtle gradations between things, whereas opacity is just like, what is going on? I think, yeah, how you experience the book, like, I think the book kind of probably sits on a knife edge, and some people have perhaps found that it doesn't answer enough questions and they're frustrated by that, whereas some people are like, oh, I left it with so many questions and I went and talked to my friends about it. So yeah, feel free to tell me if anyone's read it in the signing line. I suppose you wouldn't come if you finished it and you wanted to throw it across the room, but I'm sure there are people who have that experience.
I was interested that you put an author's note at the end as well. What made you do that?
Oh yeah, I sort of regret putting this in there because I get asked about it all the time. It's not. That's not a bad question. When I tell the story, it's not flattering to me, so you'll understand why I don't like to. It's just embarrassing. But basically, so I'll just read it. So the book opens with an epigraph, which says, "Unexpressed emotions will never die. They are buried alive and will come forth later in uglier ways." And when I was researching the book, I came across that quote, and it was attributed to Sigmund Freud. And I highlighted it in my notes, and I was like, perfect, that perfectly encapsulates the exact idea that I'm trying to write about. This idea that unexpressed emotions come forth in ugly ways, and so if someone is exhibiting kind of ugly symptoms, it must be because there's a repressed emotion lurking somewhere under the surface, and therefore that if we can identify the source of that emotion and the thing that's been repressed, we can kind of solve the mystery of them. And so I was like, that's the sort of psychoanalytic concept that I'm trying to write about, and Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, said it, so I'll put it at the front of the book and everyone will know what I'm on about. And then it went through multiple edits, and then on the last edit, my copy editor, who I think might be here tonight, sorry, I won't embarrass her if she is. Oh, she's not here tonight. Okay. Well, I won't, okay. Oh, well, this story isn't embarrassing anyway for her. Worked with her on all three of my books, and she's amazing, and she just had a little note at the start, and she was like, I don't think Freud said that. And so then I obviously Googled it, and I found so many infographics and memes with a black and white photo of Freud's face and that text superimposed on it, but I couldn't find one legitimate source. And so it was just fake news. And then I decided to keep it, but then put an author's note at the end explaining my error, because I thought the whole book is about people taking evidence and fitting it into a pre-existing narrative that suits them. And it's about how that impulse is so human, and how we all have such a flawed subjective view of the world. And I thought it was a nice irony that in the process of writing about that, I also had just taken a piece of evidence that fit with my narrative and not questioned it, and shoved it right at the front, which is all a very convoluted explanation for the fact that I just didn't do proper research.
So why do you regret putting the author's note in? You don't want to admit to it.
Sorry, so that's why I regret putting it in. I sort of put it in out of guilt, and then I had to sit up on stage and be I was going to start my book with a misquote from a meme.
That does remind me of there's inspirational memes all over Facebook that say, we only have to get lucky once, you have to get lucky every time. And it's actually the IRA's warning to Margaret Thatcher. And it's been turned into an inspirational meme on Facebook. So true though. So what comes first for you then? Is it the themes, is it the plot, or is it the characters? Because the characters are also so vividly drawn, very, very real people. So I was curious what comes first to you when you're putting it on the page.
Oh, thank you. So I think I start with I guess I start with an idea, and then I usually have one dramatic situation to dramatize that idea. So in this book I had the idea of a family holiday that erupts in violence in some way. And so I started with a conventional nuclear family, and then if you want tension, you have to introduce outsiders, because then that sort of gives the family the opportunity to perform for the outsiders. And then if you have a performance, then you have cracks in the performance, and it sort of gives having outsiders casts the psychological fault lines in relief. So so I started with the patriarch of this nuclear family, and then the first outsider, which is a bit odd because they're now quite minor characters in the book. But the outsider is this patriarch's oldest friend who he met at university, who is a single gay man who's never had a family, and he's recently taken in his 18-year-old great nephew whose mother has just died, and he doesn't have any family. So you've got this family of a mum and a dad and two daughters, and then these two outsider figures who are they're trying to establish a new family dynamic between the two of them, and they're coping with grief at the same time as trying to work out how they fit in the orbit of this more stable family. I just started with those two middle-aged men, which was cool because I'd never written about men, or I'd never written from the perspective of men before.
Yeah, I was about to say it's really interesting that the two perspectives you started from were men, which is unusual, as you just said, for you. So did you have a different approach to writing their perspectives, or anything that you did differently?
No, I think I was just a bit bored of myself, so I tried something, as in not bored of writing about myself, I was bored of the things that I'd written before, so I just wanted to try something different. But yeah, it was interesting because I think once I started, it's not that different really at all, because I think when you're trying to write a person and make them feel real, you never start with broad identity categories. You never think what are all middle-aged men like? You think who is this person? Who are they on holiday with? What's the most important relationship that they have? Are they frustrated this morning? Have they had a fight with someone? How are they feeling in their body? Are they sweaty? And those kind of really granular questions are the same of every single person. So yeah, I think it's like the way into someone's psyche starts really small. And I think that's just because that's, at least for me, that's true of like my experience of what it is to be a human in the world. Like I don't walk down the street thinking, I'm a woman in her late 20s who is Australian. Like I walk down the street thinking, oh, I've got to do this afternoon and that person was annoying and my shoe doesn't fit, I've got a blister. So yeah, it's sort of like if you're trying to imagine what it's like to be someone else, the access points are not really to do with those bigger identity categories in my experience.
There's also a character in this book who suffers seizures, which is one of the most intense, obvious and dramatic symptoms that a person can have. Also quite common, like I'm sure a lot of people in this room have seen someone have a seizure or know someone who has them regularly. Out of all the symptoms that you could have given her, why did you choose seizures?
Well, you sort of answered it in the question, to be honest. It is so dramatic. So the book deals with with psychosomatic illness. So it's when people have a physical symptom of a psychological cause. So that can be anything from like nausea or a headache from stress, all the way to like some people experience paralysis or seizures. And so I knew I wanted to write about that. And that sort of feeds into what I was talking about before with the trauma plot, because often for people who have psychosomatic illnesses, the people around them assume that the illness is an expression of some kind of trauma that they must have suffered in the past. So I knew that I wanted a character to experience that, because that was sort of a way to dramatize this broader cultural narrative that I was interested in. And then if you're going to write a whole book about someone with a functional neurological disorder, not to be glib, but if they just had a headache, it would be a bit boring. So a seizure is sort of, well, also like in this book, the illness needed to drive the plot because the other characters kind of hypothesize about what the cause might be. So that meant it needed to be something very visible. And obviously a seizure is a very visible thing, and the book opens with her having one when all the characters are present. So yeah, also seizures have a rich literary history. I think Dostoevsky had seizures, and there's a character in his book The Idiot who has seizures. So yeah, seizures are traumatic.
Did you learn anything that surprised you about, because I do find them really compelling, like my son had a seizure when he was 18 months old, and so I think I find them particularly compelling. And I found out a lot of, you assume some things, we all grow up knowing what they are, but you assume some things, and then once you start looking into them, realise there's so much more to them, I guess, than you realise. Was there anything that surprised you in your research of them?
Yeah, so much. So one thing that was really interesting, I read a book called The Smell of Burning, which is a non-fiction book about seizures, and one of the things that was so interesting to me, which I didn't know about, is that they call them auras, which is like the symptoms you get to tell you that a seizure is coming on, and they can be so, again, to use this word, like I don't want to be glib and sort of make other people's experiences into entertainment, but they're so dramatic and they're almost like poetic. Like some people, the kinds of auras people have is the sort of more conventional ones are like scene flashing lights, but some people hear the same few bars of music every time, or other people experience a really intense deja vu. Or other people they report like what they call like a state of existential bliss. So they just feel like everything in the world is exactly the way it's meant to be, and that's like the feeling that envelops them right before they pass out. So anyway, I just didn't know about that before I wrote this book, and it's just like so interesting what the mind is capable of.
I did not know that either, about the euphoria or the bliss.
So you're like, can I have it?
Oh no, I did think for, considering the times that we're in, I did think for a brief moment, it would be nice to feel like everything was right in the world for a moment. You also in this book have alternating timelines. which is an extremely difficult thing to pull off. How did you go about doing that? Was that a lot of planning, or do you kind of make it up as you go writing, or how did you make those timelines work?
With great effort is the answer. So it didn't happen organically. The book's written. The book covers, so the chapters alternate between the past and the present, but it covers a week. So it starts on Monday and you get what happened in 2008 and what happened in 2024 on that Monday, and then it goes on to Tuesday and you get what happened in both timelines on that day, right the way through the week. And the way I wrote it was, I knew that I wanted to have these alternating timelines because, as I said before, it's a book about how we interpret other people. And so the whole conceit of it was, if the characters are going through this process of trying to understand the links between the present and the past and the significance of previous events in people's lives now, I was like, what if I present it to the reader like a puzzle with the present and the past braided together? And so then the reader has to undergo the same process as the characters, and they're always trying to understand how the chapters fit together and what the patterns are between them. So I wrote them discreetly, just so I knew what happened in each timeline. So I had like a short novel in 2008 and then another short one in the present. And then I mixed them all up, and then I sent it to my publisher. And in the first iteration, what happened in 2008 happened 3 days, and then what happened in the present happened over a year. And my publisher sent it back to me, and he was like, you can have the two timelines, but they cannot be like this. He was like, they have to cover the same span of time, which is just a really good example of a great edit, because you don't want to hear it because it's a lot of work, but as soon as you hear it, you realise that it's obvious and you should have thought of it before. And that's why you have an editor, to see the things that you can't see anymore because you've been looking at it so hard. And then I just had like a weird month where I was like cancelling plans, being like, I can't see you because I have to make a year a week. And people were like, okay, like it's fake. You made it up.
I did wonder about the editing process in this book, because you're doing quite a lot with competing timelines, themes, characters, plot. There's a lot of plot in this book, and you've absolutely pulled it all off. And to make something that readable, and really easily readable, actually, I know that a lot of work goes into that. So were there any other edits that really stuck with you?
Oh, apart from the one at the very beginning being like, Freud didn't say that. Were there any? I mean, like that structural edit was a big one, because that's a good example of like something like that saves the book. Like it makes it work, whereas before it didn't. So I think a good structural edit is kind of like putting a final piece in a machine. So it's pretty, like if you don't have that piece, the machine won't turn on. So I think those edits are usually more like, they're like really dramatic interventions. I'm trying to think if I had, you get so many edits. I did write it, like, it wasn't all the product of editors.
Well, what's the actual writing process like for you? Because you're so prolific. It's 3 books in 4 years. What is the writing process? You sit down and plan it all out and have like a spreadsheet and then write to that? Do you just like free write, or do you have to have a fully formed idea in your head before you can write? What's it?
So I do kind of half and half, so which is like not super, there would be an easier way, but I free write. So when I have an idea for a situation or a relationship, I just write as many scenes as I can imagine between those groups of people, and then when I have like 40 to 60,000 words, I read the whole thing, and I cut anything that makes me cringe or that I'm skim reading because it's so boring. And then from what remains, I plot out a novel, and then I go back from the beginning and write it to that plan. And that's how I've done all of my books.
That is mental.
Yeah.
I have never heard that process before.
Yeah,
Truly original.
That's what I mean when I'm like, it's not, it's not efficient. But I think the reason I have to do that is because I just feel like if you're writing, I guess if you're writing, I mean, not to get too hung up on like genre distinctions, but if you're writing literary fiction, what people are reading it for is like psychological insight, and they want the characters to feel real. And so I feel like if I just thought of a plot that was going to be really interesting and then I marched the characters through that plot, it would feel like I was moving chess pieces around, and it wouldn't feel like people were privy to real lives. And so I think that original phase of free writing is how, I mean, it makes you sound like a crazy person, but like you do get to the end of the day of writing and you look at what you're written and you're like, I did not think that person would do that, but there they are. And I think it's those moments that are like surprising, where you surprise yourself, that ultimately feel real.
Oh, it's a mental process, but it absolutely works. I didn't say it didn't work.
No, I agree with you. Like, it's not efficient, but yeah, that's just to say I'm not doing it like to torture myself.
So privilege is a theme that has run through all three of your books. It isn't the major theme of this book, but it's definitely in there. And why do you keep returning to that? Why do you find it so compelling?
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it's funny, like every time you write a book, the reason you write it is because you find it interesting and you think you've got something new to say, ideally that like no one else has ever said before, and then you finish it and you look at your previous work and you think, oh, I said that before. And so with this book, I definitely had that quite keenly. Like I got to the end and I was like, oh, this is a book about class and sexual assault and people stealing each other's stories, which is what my first book was about. But yeah, so I don't know. I mean, that's obviously something that I find personally compelling on some subjective, like subconscious level. So yeah, I think maybe that's one to talk to a therapist about. But yeah, I think although, to answer it more seriously with the privilege thing, I think one thing that really interests me about privilege that I was particularly conscious of in this book is I'm always just interested in subjectivity, and it's always fun to have to kind of mine the gap between how people see themselves and how other people see them. And I think with privilege, it's interesting because almost nobody likes to think of themselves as privileged. And so, for example, in this book, there's this nuclear family of wealthy Australians who've rented a villa in the south of France for this holiday. And then there's a few outsiders, some of whom are not from wealthy families, and like they've had to get a passport for the first time to come on this holiday. And they get to France and they're so alienated by it. Like they find it's difficult to enjoy because it's such a foreign experience, and they don't find the family particularly welcoming, and they sort of feel like there's this glamour that is intimidating and they can't live up to. And then meanwhile, there's a bigger villa behind the villa that they've rented, which is owned by a British man who inherited it from his father. So the nuclear family is looking up on the hill and they're feeling intimidated, and they're like, oh, well, we're just renting, we're Australians, we don't belong in Europe, it's too sophisticated for us. And I think that's an interesting thing. Like there's always a proverbial villa on a hill, and like everyone's always looking in the other direction. And I think as a novelist, that's a really interesting thing to play with about how people's insecurities are often kind of at an angle to the judgments that other people are actually making about them.
I actually thought that the guy in the bigger villa, I thought he was spending his privilege in a great way, which was sitting there writing thrillers, perving on the women in the house down the hill.
Yeah, he was having a fun summer.
You mentioned the smell of burning before, that you read that in relation to seizures. What else were you reading when you wrote this book?
So I did read a fair bit of non-fiction about sort of seizures and I guess psychoanalysis and psychosomatic disorders, which was interesting, and it was good. I haven't really written something before that relies on research, so that was cool. I spoke to a few doctors as well, again, which was a new experience for me. So, and I was very grateful for their time. And then for pleasure, or not for pleasure, I guess in fiction, I'm quite sort of porous. Like I kind of inadvertently copy whatever I happen to be reading at the time. I'm not to say I'm plagiarizing, but it's more like the style seeps into what I'm writing. So I kind of find that I have to, when I'm actively working on something, I just have to read the kind of books that are in the same style. Otherwise, it ends up just being a hodgepodge. So I like for this book's written in the third person, so I could only read books written in the third person. And I read a lot of like that Deborah Levy book I mentioned, or what else did I read? I'm trying to think. There was a great series of novels called the Patrick Melrose novels, which kind of they go in and out of multiple people's perspective at quite a quick clip. So I read and reread them. Yeah.
And we're going to be asking for questions soon. I just give the warning now so that people can think about what they want to ask and get ready to raise your hand so we don't have that awkward moment of sitting in silence before 7 hands go up. You've said a lot that you wrote your first book out of boredom during lockdown. Well, you wrote it, I don't know if you say actually that you wrote it out of boredom, but you wrote it during lockdown. You weren't planning to write a novel, which is pretty amazing considering the career that you've carved out in your 20s doing this. So what do you think you would be doing if COVID hadn't hit?
Oh, I mean, yeah, it's actually scary to think about. Like, I'm genuinely so grateful, and it is like it's an amazing. Yeah, I really do feel like I got such a lucky break, and I do pinch myself all the time for just getting to do what I love. And sorry, the answer is I probably would have been working. I had a job at a corporate law firm, which I deferred for the year after university. Like I took a gap year just because I didn't want to do it. So I think I would probably be working there, and I think I would be really miserable and making everyone around me miserable. So I think the legal profession is grateful to have a way of doing goodbye.
That's pretty extraordinary, isn't it, how things turn out? You take a gap year and then you publish a book at 24 and COVID hits and you publish a book.
No, I'm so conscious of that, and it's an amazing thing to, like, it is such an amazing position to like get to go to work every day and actively think, I got such a lucky break to be here.
Are there any authors that you look at, because it was obviously unplanned to become a successful novelist? Are there any authors that you look at now and you look at your careers and that you feel are guiding you or that you would like to replicate in your own way?
Yeah, it's a bit of an odd answer. I feel like I'm making myself sound like I'm so fascinated by middle-aged men in this talk, or like older men, because it's obviously not drawing an equivalence. It's more like the career I most admire is Ian McEwan. Just because he just has pumped out like a book every 3 years for decades and decades, and he's one of my favourite authors, and I think he's a genius, and I think he's written like the greatest works of the 20th century. So no, this is not to, like, you know, you can tell this is upcoming. I don't want to criticise him, but my favourite thing about his career is that there's so much variation, and they're both in style and in quality. He's written some of the great masterworks of this century, and then he's written some books that are just not that good. And that to me is like the guiding light, because I just like to think that the masterworks depended on the bad ones, and that it's like if you have room to experiment and push yourself, then that means that you'll sometimes fail, but that also makes you a better writer. So I think his career kind of encapsulates that idea that it's not really like, it's not about the success of each book, it's about pushing yourself each time, and it's like an apprenticeship, and if you can try something different and pick up a new skill, then that it means that the process is worthwhile in and of itself, irrespective of how each book does. Yeah, that's my rant about Ian McEwan.
That's great to take from his career, to have the courage to take risks.
Yeah.
I
feel
you haven't written a dud yet though. So, questions from the audience. We're going to need Dan to take a roving microphone, and then Diana and I will just share this one. And I will repeat your question for the live stream, because the live stream is picking up our lapel microphones. Anyway, I just explained the technology to you. Questions, hands up. Who's going to ask the first question? Thank you, brave lady in the red.
Your book's based in France. Did you go to the actual area where your book was based on to get your research?
So the question was, did Diana go to the area of France where most of, or half the book is based for her research?
The short answer is no. It's been pointed out to me that I could have had a tax-deductible holiday in the south of France. So, yes, I regret that the answer is no. And the reason I did that was because basically, like, I guess the genre convention of summer noir is that you meet characters in an idyllic location, and the perfection of the location adds to the sense of dread, because it's like this kind of counterintuitive thing that we all kind of intuit that perfection's precarious. So if characters are having an ideal holiday, the audience is kind of like moving to the edge of their seats thinking, how's it all going to fall apart? And so I sort of felt like I wanted the south of France to exist in this like almost idealized way as we've inherited it from culture, from popular culture. So there's like a bit in the book where one of the characters looks out the window and he looks out onto these lavender fields and he thinks it looks more like a painting than it does like real life. And that was the kind of almost dreamlike perfection that I was going for. So I just sort of thought, oh, look, if I go there and I don't like my Airbnb, or like it's hard to drive around, it's going to shatter this surrealism that I'm going for. So yeah, I didn't go, but I did a lot of like Google Earth not Google Earth, that's so old, like just Google Maps Street View, and I had a house that I found on booking.com that is the house that they stay in, that does exist. And so I looked at all the photos and stuff.
Wow, you could have got a tax-deductible stay in the actual
in the
villa.
house, yeah. So
any other questions? Yes, we're on a roll now.
When you're writing characters who have experiences that differ from your own, do you find that they come to you sort of somewhat formed and then you flesh them out as part of the story? Or do you find that when you're writing, you have to then create the characters to fit the story, if that makes sense?
So the question was, when Diana's writing characters with experiences different to her own, do they come to her fully formed, or does she find that she has to flesh them out?
Yeah, I think I'm really wary. I think that's what I was sort of, why I went on that kind of rant about the whole free writing thing, because I'm very wary of like giving characters, and especially when it's an experience that I haven't had. I'm very reticent to give a character an experience just because it's good for the plot. That almost feels like cheap somehow, or reductive to kind of. I think it often happens in terms of like negative experiences. Like I think sometimes as a writer, well, at least for me, like if you're thinking about how you hold the reader's attention and you get halfway through a novel and then you get almost itchy because you're like, oh, this is getting boring, something bad should happen. And so then you're like, oh, maybe one of the characters can, die in some weird way, or maybe they can get attacked, or maybe they can attack each other. Like you, and I think that I sort of feel like that way lies danger, because then you're not interested in the experiences in and of themselves. You're like interested in those experiences as a tool to just kind of keep the plot motoring along. So yeah, I don't know. I suppose if that answers your question. So I kind of, I think it's more the former. I think it's more that the characters come to me fully formed with a certain set of experiences that shape them, and then I kind of wrangle that into a plot, rather than kind of giving them experiences just to keep the story moving.
And over here?
Oh yeah. What's his name? I'm sure you know. I just want to know how you go about naming your characters. Is it, all of the above? Is it like, oh, I just like the name Ella? That's a random one. But is it something that you like to draw a connection to, or do you just get knee deep in a dictionary? I mean, a name dictionary? How?
Great question. How do you name your characters?
Thank you. I find names really hard, actually. I mean, a starting point is like, you just don't want to pick a name of someone you know personally, unless they've got a super generic name. Like one of the characters in this book's called Sam, just because you don't want people to think the book's about them. Yeah, but it's like, if I know 10 Sams, then it could be any of you. So yeah, that's like the threshold question, is like, am I going to offend anybody? And then from there, I often don't really have names in early drafts. Like, I know who the person is, but I haven't decided what they're called yet. And then sometimes I look up the most popular names in the year that they were born in whatever country, or sometimes towards the end of the story, when I'm thinking about like how I want to surprise the reader, I might give them a name that has some kind of allusion or some reference from literature to sort of make the reader feel one way about them, and then surprise them later. So I guess like to play with the reader's expectations. And then a weird one that I've kind of picked up since I live in London now, and I moved to London halfway through writing this book, and this is all making me sound not super all there. I live near a graveyard, which I go running around in, and graveyards are great for names. It's just a forest of first and last names. So I do kind of have a look around, and sometimes you'll see, often it's surnames that are helpful, and you'll think, oh, that's a good name, R.I.P.
Yes, just here.
I'm interested in your endings, and how early on do you draft or think about the ending, and does that set the direction of the narrative?
Oh, another great question. How does Diana decide her endings? Does she know when she's sitting down to write the book what the ending will be? Does it drive the narrative? Or I guess does it come to you while you're writing?
Yeah, I mean, I think perhaps people who've been frustrated by this book will suspect that the answer is that I don't know the ending when I start. So I'm not like, I'm sort of curious to see where the characters will go, rather than marching them to a finish line. But I think that you always know when you've got there, and it's usually like quite late in the drafting process, and then it sort of feels like everything clicks, and the choices that you made earlier suddenly make more sense in light of where they've ended up.
Anyone else? Yep.
I particularly love your descriptions of Sydney and how you write about Sydney. Does that come from a passion for the place or personal experience? And will we see more writing about Sydney in your next few books?
Does your great writing of Sydney come from a passion for the place, and are we going to see more of it, or where does it come from, the way that you're able to, and you're right, like the way that you're able to vividly evoke Sydney?
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's funny, like I do love Sydney, but I think I certainly didn't sit down with the first two books thinking that I was going to write books about Sydney. I think it more came from just it's where I've grown up and it's kind of all that I know. But yeah, there's this like good line in that Greta Gerwig film Lady Bird where the character's written a piece about Sacramento, which is her hometown, which she actively hates and like can't wait to get out of. And then her English teacher is like, oh, you obviously love Sacramento. And then she's like, no, I don't hate it, it's a hole. And the teacher's like, oh, but you loving something is just paying attention and you've picked up so many details, so you do love it. So I think that's probably, and I've never hated Sydney, I've always loved it, but I think it's more like maybe writing about it, I guess, kind of engaged that passion more. Like I think it had maybe been dormant, and then when you try to articulate something and you try to pinpoint what the details are that make it special, that is kind of like an act of loving it. So I think I always loved it, and then I love it even more having gone through the exercise of trying to write about it.
Okay, that brings us to the end. Please join me. Diana is going to be signing books after this at the back, so go and say hello, buy a book, and get your books you're holding signed. Please join me in thanking her for such a wonderful conversation this evening.
Thank you. Can we also give Bridie a round of applause for such great hosting?